My mother was a nurse. My aunt was the worst physiotherapist I've ever known. She was dreadful, but I didn't want to go into the medical profession, really, although my dad was a great doctor. But I was always more interested in music, and I loved radio and television right from the word go. So it was a profession I admire it, but I wouldn't have wanted to go into it. No, I don't like the sight of blood.
The Dr. Hilary Show, brought to you by HealthSpan, bringing you quality vitamins and supplements since 1996. Hi, I'm Dr. Hilary Jones. Welcome to episode 3 of the Dr. Hilary Show. Now, coming up, the man who launched Radio 1 in 1967 and recently celebrated 60 years on the air. Tony Blackburn will tell me why he's still working at 81 and how medicine runs in his family. Plus, alcohol. It's the biggest cause of liver disease in the UK, but for many, the signs come too late. As many as 1 in 4 of us drink in a way that could harm our health. I'll be joined by one of the country's top hepatologists, Professor Stephen Ryder. But first, some of the medical stories that caught my eye this week. Last week, I told you how in just the last year, 89 million prescriptions were written for antidepressants in the UK. And whilst it's positive that we're able to talk about mental health these days, that number is pretty alarming. With me is consultant pharmacist Raj Patel, a good friend of mine. Raj, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, sir.
Now, I want to start by asking if you've been watching the Olympics.
Yeah, I watched the final last night and small margins there. It's amazing. It's an amazing event too to watch, and brilliant. And Djokovic won as well, so he's got everything he needs to put in his pocket. Brilliant. Have you been watching it?
I have indeed. I've been glued to it, and I think, like millions of people, I've been inspired by the standards that continually grow at every Olympics. We talk in our world today, don't we, about standards falling in most areas, but I think in the Olympics it bucks the trend. The standards are higher and higher, and we're just in awe of these people, their skill, their strength, their endurance, their dedication. And, 2 things struck me, at least 2. One was that people can overcome almost anything. There was the guy who won the bronze in the vault. He had Perthes disease of the hip, aged 5, and he was prevented from doing any sport at all for 3 years. And he came back and won a bronze Olympic medal. So that was Harry Hepworth, an amazing achievement. And then there was Georgie Brayshaw, who won gold in the women's quad sculls, who had a riding accident age 15, was in a coma for 9 days and intensive care, and was paralysed for a while down her left side, came back and won gold. So what message is this for people? It's so inspiring. You can almost overcome anything if you put your mind to it.
I think the key message around all of this is just about the mental strength of these individuals. You're talking about antidepressants, but they must have been in a dark place, but they've overcome their fears, maybe with or without medicine, but to take it to a very high level and get to the Olympics. Absolutely. Mind is a powerful thing.
Well, Adam Peaty as well, a great inspiration for people who've had depression and overcome mental health. To talk so openly and candidly about it, really, really good. And what a legend of the Olympics for us in the UK. I understand that pharmacists are quite worried about the trend for fake semaglutide weight loss injections that are doing the rounds. It's so important, isn't it, to be aware that there are fake injections which could be harmful, and if you're buying them online from an unregulated source, you just don't know what you're getting.
That's correct. I mean, just making sure that wherever you're buying it from, that the pharmacy has got a registered, there's a special badge that has on the website. A lot of fakes, you've got to be careful that, it doesn't have the wrong things in there, which could then jeopardize your health and your internal organs. So be extra vigilant, extra careful. And I think the best thing to do is to speak to your local pharmacist and just ask them where the best place is to source some of these products from.
And part of the problem is that there's been a shortage of these injections, which should be reserved for people who need them most, so type 2 diabetics, for example, and people whose obesity levels is with BMI of over 30. But because of that shortage, that is fueling the illicit trade in these fake medicines, and the MHRA have warned about it, the WHO have warned about it. So people really need to be vigilant and trust their pharmacists for advice, don't they?
Yeah, and then the shortage is, it's been fueled by people jumping on the bandwagon because they help lose weight, and all the celebrities and the famous people are all doing it as well, trying to help them lose weight. But then this compromises real patients, the diabetics, who are, it's sort of targeted to help them improve their health.
Yeah. Well, talking of shortages, there's been quite a few shortages of medicines in recent time. HRT was the big one a few months ago, but also people who need medicines for ADHD have found it really hard to get the medicines that suit them most. There's been shortages of semaglutide. There's been shortages of all sorts of things, pancreatic enzymes. What's going on, Raj?
I think there's lots of factors that are causing it, and it's part of the Brexit, the war, Ukraine, Russia war, COVID-19, energy costs, inflation, logistics issues, and this is just sourcing the raw ingredients. I mean, this has had a huge impact on how pharmacists are working. We can spend up to 12, 15 hours a week just trying to get the medicines for our patients. And the biggest problem that we are faced with is that we get a lot of abuse because patients think that we're not trying to supply them, and they get aggressive. And it's really difficult to manage those types of patients because we want to give them the medicines, but we're not able to source them properly. One situation back in December 2022 with the antibiotics shortages, at peak time, patients, children were struggling to find their antibiotics for, strep A and scarlet fever, and there was no penicillin around, and it was very, very scary at the time. And patients, parents were getting very angry about it. Why can't we get them? And we didn't have an answer.
And even life-saving medicines, potentially such as adrenaline pens, were in short supply for a while.
That's right, yeah. And imagine the impact it not only has on pharmacists, but the patients. They're sitting there nervously thinking, no, I could be at serious risk, and stress and emotional turmoil that they could go, not only impacts themselves, but also the family and the people around them.
Do you think it's going to get better, this situation?
In my opinion, I don't think so. I might say a few controversial things here, but it's supply and demand now. There's a case of the drug companies holding some of it back, which then inflates the prices and they make more money or make more profit. So a balance needs to be reached there.
It's a global demand as well. It's not just a UK demand. And of course, those public-facing jobs like that we have, you do get people who get aggressive. They blame us. It's not our fault. We do our best. And I know you do. You go the extra mile to try and obtain these medicines for patients, but it's very time-consuming.
Yeah, very time-consuming and very stressful. 10, 15 years ago when it was a lot simple. You just send an order, it comes in the afternoon, patient gets the medicine. Now you send an order, there's also allocations. You're only allowed to have 3 or 4 of these products because they're rationing them to certain pharmacies, so you can only get a few. But then that means that you don't, it's like the HRT medication. When it was in short supply, we had to, if I got a box of 10 of them, I'd have to pick and choose. And they give one box or a few patches to one, and then to another. So that it's a true case of going back to the old days where you had rations.
Well, I'm going to have to thank you for helping me out in obtaining medicines that were needed in my practice before now. So thanks for that. And of course, you're being asked to do more and more. So you've already been given a list of 7 things that you can prescribe for where people don't need to see their GP. And I'm so in favour of this. So instead of, say, women who have recurrent urinary tract infections having to get that appointment with such difficulty with their GP, GP, they can come to you. You can do a test, you can prescribe. It's got to be good. People with sinusitis, people with sore throats, they can come to you without an appointment and get it done there and then.
Convenience is brilliant. I mean, we're open long hours as well. So, some of the pharmacies are open later and at the weekends when access is limited, and also reduces the impact that it has on the A&E in the hospital and walk-in centres. Patients are loving it. And most patients can get to the pharmacy within 15, 20 minutes. So, it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, and those patients need to now put their prescription request in early if there's a shortage of medicines. Be organised. Just remember when you're going to need that repeat prescription. Get it ordered from the GP and come and see you early rather than leave it to the last minute. That's always been the case, isn't it?
I had an example exactly the same the other night. 5 to 9, we close at 9 o'clock. Patient's daughter they're going on holiday the next morning. And they come in and they hadn't ordered their prescription. They may have ordered their sun lotion, their creams, their fancy dresses, the bikinis, and all the rest of it. But the most important thing is their medicines to keep them going. Luckily, we came with a solution. So pharmacists are always there.
Yeah.
Third emergency service.
And I always say, don't forget to read the literature. It's there for a reason. Understand what the side effects might be. Don't give your prescription to other people. Don't store it in the cupboard if you haven't finished the course, which you should have done anyway. So the messages that have been there for years still apply, don't they?
I think the key thing, I would like patients to do is actually just read the patient information leaflet. There's long-term effects that can have common side effects and serious side effects. Now, patients look at the leaflet and they get worried. But my advice is, at least you know what could go wrong, okay? And all of a sudden you start sprouting mushrooms on the back of your head. That could be the medication. And reading the leaflet is scary, but once again, the pharmacist's there to help and support you if you've got any concerns.
Absolutely. Raj, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We will discuss more items in the future because this is relevant to so many people who have health issues. That's a lovely overview of what's going on right now. Thank you so much. And we'll speak soon.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Dr. Hillary, and good luck. Have a great day.
Thanks, Raj, and you. Now, coming up.
And then, of course, I had sepsis last year. That was a bit touch and go because I had bacteria went into the heart. So I was having injections every 4 hours. But at the moment, touch wood, everything seems to be in working order as much as it can be when you're 81.
I'll be speaking to Tony Blackburn.
The Dr. Hillary Show, brought to you by HealthSpan, bringing you quality vitamins and supplements since 1996.
Over 600,000 people in the UK are estimated to live with some form of serious liver disease. But how much do you really know about the risks? 1 in 5 of us is at risk of developing the disease, and tragically, for many, the diagnosis comes too late. I'm joined in the studio by one of the country's top hepatologists, Professor Stephen Ryder. Stephen, nice to see you again.
Andy, good morning.
The statistics are pretty alarming. Something like 10,000 people will die of alcoholic liver disease in the UK every year, 27 people every day. And that's an increase of 400% in the last 2 decades. The biggest killer in people aged 35 to 49. Not many people will know that. It is alarming. What's going on?
Yes, I think our society has changed. We do more things that our livers don't like more often. And I guess alcohol is a big part of that. We drink more as a society than we ever did. And also, our drinking seems to be more concentrated in fewer people in the population. So I think we saw in lockdown, more people became teetotal, but people who drank heavily tend to drink much more heavily. And of course, they're much more at risk of physical harm. And I guess the other thing is that as a society, we've got heavier, and central weight gain is the other significant cause of liver disease through fatty liver. So both of those risk factors in our population are much more common than they used to be.
So alcohol is the biggest threat to people's livers, isn't it? Something like there are 12,000 deaths and 10,000 of those are due to largely to alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol's definitely the biggest cause of deaths, although I think weight-related fatty liver is quite likely to catch it up and overtake it in the future. But certainly at the moment, probably 2/3 of deaths from alcohol related of liver disease are related to alcohol.
So we said in our introduction that often when the first signs develop, it's too late to do much about it. Tell me more about that.
Yes, unfortunately, your liver doesn't tell you that it's being injured. So although liver cells may die as a result of damage from alcohol or other causes, in the short term, your liver's very good at replacing them. And I guess most people have heard of that liver's ability to regenerate. Unfortunately, that doesn't protect people if the injury is a chronic one that goes on for many years, because then the liver heals with scarring. And it's a buildup of scarring in the end that distorts the liver, and it reaches a point when the liver can't cope with that degree of scarring anymore, and then it will fail. So for most people, they've had damage going on, gradually accumulating scarring in their liver over 2-3 decades before they get symptoms. And of course, by the time you get symptoms, you've had that very long history of damage. It's much less likely to be reversible or preventable than it would have been had we detected it 2 decades earlier.
And actually, when people do develop the late stages of liver failure, it's pretty nasty, isn't it?
It is. I think we tend to focus on reducing people's life expectancy, but actually the impact on people's quality of life with liver failure is very dramatic. Some of the signs of liver failure are very sudden and very dramatic, vomiting blood from swollen veins in the esophagus, for example. But some have a terrible impact on people's life. People lose muscle mass, they're less able to move around. They develop what's called hepatic encephalopathy, which is where the waste products that the liver normally takes out of the blood aren't removed, and they go into the brain, causing confusion and muddling. So a lot of symptoms that are very difficult for people and the families of people with liver disease to cope with.
You said that some people are drinking less, others are drinking more. Which parts of the population are more at risk at the moment?
Well, currently, if you look at our population, we tend to see more alcohol consumed by people with more money, actually. But paradoxically, they seem to be less prone to end up with liver disease. Maybe something about their diets protect them a little bit. So there's definitely a big socioeconomic gradient. So the poorer and more disadvantaged you are, the more likely you are to develop liver disease. But certainly it tends to be a disease these days, unfortunately, which affects quite young people. So the average age of death from alcohol-related liver disease is 59. So it robs people of lots of their productive years of life.
We've been trying to tell our patients for some years what is a safe level of drinking. So at the moment, we're saying no more than 21 units a week, I believe. But does that necessarily mean that everyone's protected if they stuck to that?
Well, I think safe is a relative term. So there's very good evidence that alcohol causes an increased risk of some diseases at very low levels. So breast cancer is the major example of that. So even at 1 or 2 units a week, there is a measurable impact in the population of increasing breast cancer risk. So I think that we've moved a bit away from now saying safe overall, keep your alcohol intake as low as possible. From a liver perspective, the guidance currently is 14 units a week. So obviously it's a bottle and a half of wine a week. And if you stick below that level, you're extremely unlikely to get liver problems from alcohol.
And what about binge drinking? Because some people say, I don't drink anything during the week, but I do let my hair down at weekends.
Yes, most of the harm from that is different. It's getting into a fight or falling down the stairs. So it still has health consequences, but they're different. Your liver's really interested generally in the overall amount of alcohol that it sees over time. So I guess there are risks to binge drinking, but if it's very infrequent, the risks to your liver are relatively modest.
Yeah. Now, in Scotland, they introduced unit pricing, didn't they, for alcohol? Has that been successful?
It has. So although it perhaps hasn't made the headlines you'd expect, but definitely Scotland had an even worse problem than England in terms of deaths from alcohol and liver disease. And they've definitely shown a slowing of that rise. It hasn't reversed, but it slowed the rise. And I think lots of other evidence of improved outcomes in social impacts on people, these sorts of things, because obviously alcohol and physical health is very important, but it has this ripple and into our social relationships, violence against women, particularly, those sorts of things. So I think the signs are positive that MUP has reduced some of those. But it's only one part, I think, of the overall solution.
Sure. Now, I know you drink in moderation, as do I. We don't ever want to come across as killjoys and tell people how they should live their lives. But how can we, in a positive way, a constructive way, encourage people to just take this on board and moderate heavy drinking?
Yes, I think you don't have to be drunk to have a good time.
No,
That's the first thing to say.
Yeah. There's a song about that.
There is. And now you can, there are plenty of non-alcohol containing drinks which are actually very
good, aren't they?
Very good, and will accompany a meal just as well as a glass of wine. So it's about just changing that balance. If the tendency often is for things to gently drift up over time. It becomes, you come home from work, feel a bit stressed about things, reach for the glass of white wine from the fridge. It's those sorts of things. Just be aware of it and look at some of the alternatives, really. It doesn't stop you going out and having a nice meal with a glass of wine, but it's just trying to keep it back at those slightly lower levels.
You're absolutely right about alcohol-free beverages now. They're actually very, very nice, and it's very difficult to taste any difference between the real thing and the zero alcohol, and that's got to be encouraged. This is more of a psychological question, but if we're worried about somebody who we think is drinking too much, what would be your approach to open that conversation?
Yes, I think being open with people and say you're worried. It's very difficult because particularly alcohol in our society, it's this very odd dynamic. It's very pervasive. Society encourages it in lots of ways, but it's still very stigmatized. So it's actually very difficult for people to accept that there's a problem. If you can persuade people to do things like through the British Liver Trust, there's a risk calculator which gives people an opportunity to look at what their individual risk would be. So just pointing people at those sorts of things. You can also take a little bit of that stigma and sting away by saying, well, liver disease caused by lots of different things. And a lot of people who drink too much are also a few pounds overweight. So you can say, well, that combination is not very good for your liver. It might be best just to look at that BLT screener, see what your risk is, and try and make some changes.
And of course, it's absolutely vital not to bring the subject up when they're under the influence.
Absolutely.
Wait till they're sober and start talking then.
But it is very striking, though. I think in virtually most discussions I have with people, when you ask the question, most people know someone who has run into trouble with alcohol. So actually just re-emphasise the fact that this is very pervasive in our society. And I think having that armoury of, if you know someone that you care about deeply, to say, just look at this in a very gentle way, just to get those thoughts dropping, I think is really important.
So we've touched on one of the other main causes of liver disease, obesity. And this will surprise many people. People know about the link between obesity and heart disease, the link between obesity and cancer, perhaps now, and diabetes, of course. But the liver disease might be a surprise to many people.
It is, isn't it? Because it's not been very well, even though it's very well recognised medically, it's not been very well promoted as part of that metabolic syndrome where central weight gain drives a whole series of changes, of which getting excess fat stored in the liver is one. So it should be much more prominently known than it is, I think. That link to diabetes, people I think are aware of, the link to heart disease through diabetes, but this seems to be a bit of an orphan that generates a lot less attention than it deserves.
Absolutely. Perhaps it's difficult to visualise fatty change in a liver. We know what liver looks like when we eat it or we see it in the butcher's shop, but we can't really visualise it in ourselves. Let's move on to hepatitis. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver caused usually by viruses, particularly B and C. Perhaps the hepatitis C has come to the fore more recently with the contaminated blood issue. How many people are at risk of hepatitis C complications?
Well, I guess there's a good and a bad bit to it. The good bit is that because we've got such effective treatment, that if we know someone's got hepatitis C, we can get rid of it. So from that side, there is a complete solution. The problem is that people may not know that they have it, because as we discussed with all forms of liver disease, they may have no symptoms that shout, this is my liver that's the issue. So it's really looking at risk factors, and the critical one is anyone who's had blood transfusion or blood products in the UK really since the mid-1980s. Screening came in the early 1990s. So after that, it was the risk was very low. But certainly before that, there was a risk, and people wouldn't have been ill necessarily at the time, so they wouldn't have known. But I think anyone who's had blood products in the UK after the mid 1980s, but before 1991, should go and get tested. People who receive medical treatment abroad in high risk areas, some parts of the world, hepatitis C is extremely common. Egypt's the highest in the world, for example. But if people have had medical treatment abroad, then they should also look for a test. And some of our migrant populations in the UK, or first generation UK born people who come from areas where there's a very high risk, some of the former Eastern European bloc states, again I mentioned Egypt, Pakistan has quite a high incidence, for example. So those are the main things that people should be aware of in terms of having a risk.
And of course, if people don't know that they're carrying hepatitis C, they can pass it on to other people. It's one of the main sources of transmission, isn't it?
Yes, although for hepatitis C, that's relatively uncommon. So in day-to-day contact, there's no risk. So if people are, for example, injecting drugs, and that's obviously transmitting blood potentially from one person to another, that carries a significant risk. But in general day-to-day contact for C, there's very little risk. Even the risk of mother-to-child transmission is quite low, so 5% or so is probably a fair rate to quote. But it's really, I think, for people to be aware of those risk factors, injecting drug use, plus the healthcare-related ones, and seek testing, because if they do get tested, we can cure them.
Yeah, you said that early diagnosis is key to the treatments being effective. So what does this testing involve?
For hepatitis C, it's a straightforward blood test, and you can request it as a home test now. So if you go onto the NHS website, there is a hepatitis C requesting portal. So there's a little form to fill in. A kit will arrive at your home. You do a finger prick test, send it back, and somebody will contact you with the results. And if it were to be positive, they'll link you straight into the treatment services. So it's a really very, very effective system. Or people can go through their GP, and if they've got a risk factor, I think now most people are very aware, particularly with the contaminated blood inquiry, of this as an issue. So I don't think people will come up against any barriers to testing.
And treatment now consists of 2 tablets for a few months usually?
It's 8 or 12 weeks tablets with virtually no side effects and cure rates of 97, 98%. So really a very trivial treatment compared to what it used to be.
Well, of course, the liver, I believe, is the biggest organ in the body. It has hundreds of different functions. We should ignore it and not look after it at our peril. It's a fascinating area, and your job must be fascinating all the time.
It's very interesting to do, mainly because you're interacting with people all the time and dealing with these slightly complicated issues about which has a big societal impact as well. You're dealing with people and how they live their lives. So I think all of that's a very enjoyable thing to do.
Well, clearly there's a lot of education to be done about our livers, so you started that. So thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you. Well, you can find out more about your liver health at the britishlivertrust.org.uk. And don't forget, for more information on anything you've heard, go to our show notes at drhillaryjones.com.
The Dr. Hilary Show, brought to you by HealthSpan, bringing you quality vitamins and supplements since 1996.
Hi, I'm Emma, producer of The Dr. Hilary Show. Hilary, can I ask you a question, please?
Go for it.
So, vitamins and supplements can help with liver function and health, but how do you know what the right ones are for you to take?
Yeah, liver function is a really hot topic at the moment, and I think it's so important to go to a reputable source for any supplements that you take. There are lots of suppliers around, but trust and reputation is paramount. I, for example, use HealthSpan, and I take vitamin D in the winter. I take some joint supplements and something for eye health, lutein and zeaxanthin. But the formulations have to be using the best ingredients. You know, they have to be high quality.
So the ingredients are important.
Very important. So different suppliers will use what seems to be the same ingredient, but if it's a different salt or a different strength, you may not be getting what you think you're getting.
And where can we find out more?
Well, a good starting point is healthspan.co.uk.
Thank you, Hilary.
60 years ago, on July the 25th, 1964, Tony Blackburn put on a pair of headphones and sat behind a microphone for the very first time on the pirate ship Radio Caroline. And since then, he's been on the radio pretty much non-stop. And at the age of 81, he's still going strong. I caught up with Tony last week and began by asking him about the highlights of his career.
I think probably in 1964, before you were born, Hilary.
I wish.
1964, July the 25th, going into the Mi Amigo, the Radio Caroline, for the first time. You know, I used to be a singer with the dance band in Bournemouth. And then I got this job on Radio Caroline, and going into the studio for the first time, 3.5 miles off the coast of Frinton in the North Sea, and going into that studio and falling in love with it. And it's funny, on my first broadcast, I never had any nerves or anything like that. It just was a natural thing, talking into a microphone. And that for me was something I'll never forget. And then, of course, opening up Radio 1 and I'm a celebrity. So I've been very, very lucky.
Well, of course, it was a pirate radio station, wasn't it? And the very word pirate was so exciting for us youngsters. It was illegal. It was naughty. It made it even more exciting, didn't it?
But it was, because we had to go out through customs. We went out from Harwich on a little tender boat that took us out to the pirate ship. We were 3.5 miles off the coast of Frinton, and the reason for that, we were in territorial waters, flying under the Panamanian flag. So it was out of the jurisdiction of Great Britain, and that's the reason why we could go on doing what we did. And we were out there for 2 weeks at a time. Then we had a week off, and coming back, we had to go through customs. And sometimes they were a bit awkward, and they kept us waiting for a long time. But it was a wonderful time. I was out there for 3 years, 2 years on Radio Caroline, and then 1 year on the station I really loved more than anything else, Big L Radio London, the American ship that brought in all these wonderful jingles and things. So it was a really fantastic time. And I was 21 years old at the time. You know, the youngest DJ in Great Britain. I think I'm now the oldest.
Well, 60 years you've just celebrated, and I mean, you look so young on it. I don't know what's your secret.
Well, I'd have to ask you that, Dr. Hilary. I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's the luck of the draw, isn't it?
Whatever you're using, I want some. I remember you telling me...
You can get some without a prescription, I would have thought.
Absolutely. I remember you telling me that your father was a GP and your mother was a nurse. So did their careers colour your take on well-being and health generally?
Well, it taught me not to go into the medical profession, because I remember my dad, he was one of the old-time doctors, and the phone used to go in the middle of the night, and he would go out and visit a patient in those days, you know. And he was a doctor that could do minor operations as well. He was a GP. But my mother was a nurse, and my aunt was the worst physiotherapist I've ever known. She was dreadful. But I didn't want to go into the medical profession, really. Although my dad was a great doctor, but I was always more interested in music, and I loved radio and television right from the word go. So it was a profession I admire it, but I wouldn't have wanted to go into it. No, I don't like the sight of blood.
Well, that's not a great advert, but you know, it's very strange because my dad was a GP and my mother was a nurse, and perhaps I should have taken a leaf out of your book and avoided a career in medicine. I did all the wrong A levels, and then I converted to medicine thereafter. But yeah, it's certainly had its challenges. So, looking back in your health, your personal journey through the years, have you had any serious health issues yourself?
Yes, I have. I had I had yellow jaundice. I had that, whooping cough, which we used to get in those days.
Back on the rise again now.
I had a thing called, which you will know, erythema nodosum.
Yeah.
I had that for a time, and I woke up on Radio Caroline and couldn't really move very well. So I was on steroids for a year. And recently I suffered from, sciatic nerve problems. an absolute mess, aren't I? But it hasn't been too bad. It's something I can control. Now the sciatic nerve, I mean, I think it was about 3 years ago, I could hardly walk. But then I had an injection in the back, which you'd know about, and that put me right. And then, of course, I had sepsis last year. That was a bit touch and go because I had bacteria went into the heart. So I was having injections every 4 hours. But at the moment, touch wood, everything seems to be in working order as much as it can be when you're 81.
Well, amazing. I mean, I remember the sepsis now. You've reminded me, and just this morning, I was listening to an interview with Craig McKinley, the MP, who's a quadruple amputee, and I'm hoping to get him on the programme in the future. But sepsis is such a serious condition with a 20% mortality, so it's really important to look at the signs and symptoms early on. So I suppose you were one of the lucky ones. You recovered without too much of an issue thereafter. So that's good. And sciatica affects so many people. I mean, it's crippling. You don't know how much you use your back and your legs until you suffer from something like that, do you?
Yeah, it's an awful thing as well. I mean, pain is an awful thing, isn't it? Because you can feel it, but other people can't actually see it. And I think sometimes they think you're putting it on. And I remember going on holiday with my wife and my daughter, and I really could not walk down from one place to another very well. And I don't think they realise what the pain that you get from it. But luckily, I found somebody who did this injection thing, and he said to me, funny enough, he said, as you get older, you'll probably get better with it. And I have done, and it's perfect. It's absolutely gone now. But it's a back problem. Affect so many people, don't they? Because we're not actually designed to stand up straight, are we?
No, that's right, and he's right. The older we get, the cartilage becomes, less flexible and less movable, and less likely to impinge on the nerve roots. So the epidural that you had, the injection that bathes the nerves, which are swollen, actually shrinks that swelling, takes the pressure off the nerve, and allows recovery to happen. I've had several epidurals myself. I used to do a lot of rowing, so it is a really good treatment if you've got that ongoing.
Yeah, mine worked for the first one I had. It worked for about a couple of years. Then it started coming back again, so I had one more, and that put it right. And I haven't had to have one since. So very lucky. But it's a horrible thing when you do get that pain and you're restricted on. I remember coming out of the BBC, a broadcasting house, and wanting to go to the Apple store down the road, and I thought I can't make it. And it's a horrible feeling, that.
Well, do you do anything now to prevent a recurrence? Are you conscious of any exercises that you should be doing? Anything like Pilates or yoga?
Well, not really, no. I mean, my dad, probably being a doctor, gave me the worst advice. He said, don't do too much exercise. It's the best. And I've taken him at his word. But he also said to me, don't smoke as well. And he used to be smoking 50 a day. But I've never smoked either. So.
Don't do as I do as I say, as most doctors would say. No, that's really interesting about doctors' advice for their children. It's like the cobbler's, children's shoes story. They're very good with their patients, not so good with their own families, I'm afraid. Yeah. So I know you're a vegetarian, I believe.
Yes, I am. I've been a vegetarian since the age of 5. We went on a family holiday, and I saw a particularly. It was on a farm we went, and I saw this particularly attractive chicken, and it was strutting around. And then the following that night, we had chicken as a menu, and I suddenly made the connection. And I thought, oh, can't eat anything that's like that anymore. So I've been a vegetarian since about the age of 5, which was in those days very, very difficult, because if you went to a restaurant, they didn't want to serve you with anything else but meat. And I remember asking, I said, well, can I just have vegetables? And I remember a waiter saying that the chef wouldn't like it. And I thought, well, he doesn't have to eat it. But nowadays, it's much easier. There's a lot of stuff for us vegetarians.
Yeah, well, we've just discovered the reason for your youthful looks now, haven't we? A healthy diet.
Well, I don't know. I think vegetarianism, I understand now, is quite good, though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you're careful to get the balance, you need the iron and the minerals and everything else. But you can certainly do that. What about eggs and fish? Did you include those in your diet?
I do eat eggs. I don't like to, but sometimes I do have an omelette or something like that. Very occasionally. I don't eat fish at all. No.
So are there any rules that you live by in terms of looking after your well-being, both physical and mental?
Um, I don't think so, really. I mean, what I do now, as I'm 81 years old and we live some of the time in North Devon, I do go on walks. I walk a little bit and try and keep moving. And I think that's quite good for you. But apart from that, no, and I enjoy the job, so that's very important. And I don't want to retire because I've seen so many people retire early and then they just keel over. And I think when you wake up in the morning, it's quite important to have something to do. And I love, but I've got it just right now. I'm touring with a theatre show. Now, I was doing 3 shows a week, which was a bit too much. So I've cut it down to just doing 1 theatre show a week now, and the radio shows at the weekend, and bits and pieces like coming and guesting on Good Morning Britain, which I enjoy doing, and things like that. So I've eased off a little bit, which I was advised to do. And now I find it great. I really am enjoying life.
I think that's so important because if you stop using it, you lose it, as we know, but
Yes.
getting that balance right is key. Now, as someone who's been an absolute expert and icon in the music industry, how important is music for you? Is it a therapy for you? Is it something that can change your mood? Without it, how would you feel?
Oh, I think music's very important. It is to me, and particularly soul music. I introduced this country about 60 years ago to Motown, and Motown's always been my love in life, and black soul music. And so I did a show a couple of nights ago, an hour of Motown, once again to celebrate my 60 years. Radio 2 said to me, look, it's your birthday, you do what you like. So I said, well, can I do an hour of Motown? So I did. And afterwards, I just felt great. And I think music can make you feel very, very good. I mean, I love whenever I hear certain records like Starbuck, Moonlight Feels Right, and Apple Peaches Pumpkin Pie, and some surf sounds, and the Beach Boys. That always makes me feel great. So I think it's a great therapy music.
Absolutely. Have you got a favourite record of all time?
Yes, England Dan and John Ford Coley, Love Is the Answer. It's got the most wonderful lyrics. And it's not a soul record, but it's just a wonderful song. I love it. There's a jazz version by Kenny Burke as well, which I like. But that particular song, to me, it says it all. And I love it.
Fantastic. And looking at the headlines today, we read about GPs thinking of taking industrial action, not happy with their contracts. People are saying they can't get appointments. We've got waiting lists. What's your overview of the NHS, the state of it today? Do you think it's wonderful? Do you think it's broken? What's your take?
Well, I mean, I've used when I had the sepsis, I was rushed into A&E, and the National Health Service did a wonderful job for me. And, they put me in care, and I did eventually go and have private thing because there wasn't a bed. So I think that the National Health Service is in a bit of a state at the moment. But of course, there are so many older people now, like myself, living longer. And I think that has become a problem, hasn't it? And that is difficult. I don't know. I think sometimes my dad said to me, no, I'm not being critical of the NHS, but he said to me, there are too many pen pushers at the top. That's what he said. So he said the structure, and this was in the 60s, he said the structure of the NHS could be a lot better. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know anything about the structure of the NHS, but they've got to do something about it because there are so many more people wanting care now, and it's so important. And we're very lucky to have the NHS.
Well, I would agree with you and your dad about the number of pen pushers in the NHS. If we had more doctors and nurses, I think we'd be better off. And interestingly, earlier I was talking about the CQC, that's the Care Quality Commission, the watchdog that governs and regulates the NHS. And actually, they've just been pronounced unfit for purpose. So I would like some of those retired doctors, like your dad was, and like my dad was, to come and take that role. They have got the experience of what needs to happen in general
Yes.
practice and in hospital medicine. And I think rather than the inexperienced youngsters coming in and not really know what they're regulating, I think some experience would be a good thing. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think in government, quite often people are put into positions like the head of the coal industry or something like that, and they've got no experience at it. I don't quite understand how that works. And it seems strange to be appointed to a job that you know nothing about.
I couldn't agree with you more. You've been wonderfully candid. Thank you for sharing your health concerns and views with us. Congratulations on 60 marvellous, fantastic years in the music industry, radio, TV. You remain one of the most popular people that we have in the media. So please keep up the good work. Don't retire. And I look forward to listening to and meeting up with you soon. Thank you, Tony.
That's very kind of you. Thanks for inviting me on your show, and good luck with it as well.
My pleasure. Stay well. My thanks again to Tony Blackburn. And that's it for episode 3 of the Dr. Hilary Show. We'll be back next week, so be sure to listen to the programme on your favourite podcast platform. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Dr. Hilary Show, and for more information, head to drhilaryjones.com.
The Dr. Hilary Show, brought to you by HealthSpan, bringing you quality vitamins and supplements since 1996.